fist fights with brass knuckles. I love to get right with the fifth and make your ass.
Hi guys, my name is Nako Nakatsuka. I'm a fourth year chemistry PhD student at UCLA, and today I'll be helping you guys out by going over some general chemistry concepts. And good luck with the course. So before I delve into conjugate acids and bases, I wanted to start by talking about what a neutralization is. So a reaction between an acid and a base is always called a neutralization. And this reaction always has a product that is salt and water. And so an acid and a base reacts to form a salt and water. So an example would be a strong acid such as HCl, hydrochloric acid, which is aqueous, plus a strong base such as sodium hydroxide, which is also aqueous. And then this would dissociate into a salt such as NaCl and water, which is a liquid. Another example would be nitric acid plus magnesium hydroxide, which is a solid, so it doesn't necessarily have to be two aqueous solutions, and you would end up with the salt MgNO3 which is aqueous, and water. Remember though, when you make an equation, you always have to make sure it's balanced. So in this case, we need to add 2 as the coefficient of the nitric acid, and we have to add 2 as the coefficient of the water. So now let's move on to talk about conjugate acids and bases. So an acid always has a conjugate base, and a base always has a conjugate acid. And so let me show you an example. Acetic acid, which is a weak acid, plus water, gives us the acetate ion and the hydronium ion. So if I draw this out for you, the acid looks like this for acetic acid. Remember that we talked about the functional group that is a very common thing to see in acids is this COOOH group. And then adding this to water, it dissociates to C double bond O, O minus, and H plus. So as you can see, this is the conjugate base because it is now negatively charged, as we talked about the different properties of acids and bases previously, and this was the acid. So another example, we start with the acetate ion. So C double bond O, O minus. So we're starting out now with a base. And now if we add the hydronium ion, H3O plus, I'm sorry to not confuse you, I'll make this the hydronium ion as well. And you would end up with C double bond O, OH, which is the conjugate acid. So here's a summary of what we just talked about with the acetic acid and the acetate ion and how they're conjugate pairs. And so common features of conjugate acid-base pairs are the equal loss or gain of protons between the pairs. And so conjugate acids and conjugate bases are characterized as the acids and bases they lose or gain protons. So as you can see in this case, the acetate ion lost this proton right here, and so it's the conjugate base now. So now let's talk about how water can act as both a proton donor and a proton acceptor. And so it's called amphiprotic. And this means that water can be a proton donor and a proton acceptor. So to show this, I'm going to write out this equation, 2H2O liquid dissociates into H3O+, the hydronium ion, and a hydroxide. So this reaction is called autoprotolysis, because one molecule transfers a proton to another molecule of the same type. So the equilibrium constant for this is going to be Kc is the product H3O+, as you've seen this equation before when we talked about equilibrium constants, over H2O squared. But remember, we talked about how liquids are not involved in the equilibrium constant equations, so we cut this out. And so the equilibrium constant for the autoprotolysis of water is H3O+, OH-, and it's often given the term Kw. And this constant for water is actually a value. So the concentration of H3O+, or the hydronium ion, is 1.0 times 10 to the power of -7. The concentration of the OH- is equal to that. Since remember, water has a neutral pH value, meaning that there was neutralization of the acid and base, so they're the same concentration, and you get a Kw value of 1.0 times 10 to the power of -14. So this is going to make a lot more sense to you guys when I start showing you how you can calculate pH values.
I love to punch straight niggas. Rude awaken, food is taking lunch meat niggas. Y'all motherfuckers phony, the father told me that